Welcome everyone to this BlackBerry LinkedIn Live, to another edition of this live show. And I'm very happy to have with me very distinguished guests. I'm your host, Ismael Valenzuela, VP of Threat Research and Intelligence Team at BlackBerry. And I'm very happy to have with us today Christine Gatsby, Tim Segato, and Ken Murphy. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about a topic that is super interesting, and I think we're going to keep talking about this topic for a long time: supply chain attacks. It's not nothing new, but we have been commissioning a report that I think it's very interesting. We're going to talk about some of the highlights of that report, what we have learned from all the people we have interviewed in different geographies around the world, different industries. We're going to talk about some of the I don't want to say solutions, but at least things that we need to think about to have in place to be able to mitigate this risk that it's there, it's not going to go away. But before we go into all of that, I want to say, thank you to all the people that are joining us, and I want to encourage them to say hi. We know we have people connecting from all over the world for this show. People from North America, from South America, from Asia Pacific, from Europe. So if you're connected, feel free to say hi and say where you're joining us from. And also, we want to keep this interactive, so please ask questions, and we will, if obviously the questions are relevant to the discussion we're having, we'll have no issues in putting the question up there and having a discussion around that. So that's why this is a live show. But before we go into the topic of supply chain, we get it, right? There's a lot of people that they come to this and it's like, BlackBerry, hold on a second, like, aren't you guys like doing phones? So let's talk about what we do. And I would love to start with you, Christine. What do you do at BlackBerry? What does your team do, and why is this related to this topic of supply chain?
Yeah, hey, thanks. Nice to see everybody. My name is Christine Gadsby. I'm the Vice President of Product Security here at BlackBerry, and our team, among many things that we do, is responsible for making sure that all of the versions of software that we have in market, those remain secure, running in all of our customers' environments. And so we do everything from the governance and compliance of that, and on things that we work to comply towards, and vulnerability management, and response, and all of that good stuff. It's a very, very wide spectrum of things that we're responsible for. But basically, we're looking after BlackBerry's created software supply chain.
Excellent. So yes, you gave us a clue, right? BlackBerry's a software company. Thank
Right.
you, and we're going to continue talking about that. Tim, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Tim Segato. So I am the Principal Product Security Compliance and Governance Manager on Christine's team. And essentially, I'm responsible for ensuring that all of BlackBerry's products and services, as Ishmael mentioned, we're now a software company, that we meet all of the regulatory frameworks, compliance frameworks, and customer security requirements to sell our products and deliver those into market. So that could take the form of audits such as, SOC 2, ISO. That can also take the place of what's the most applicable to this discussion, Presidential Executive Order 14028, improving the nation's cybersecurity, which is really looking at ensuring software companies can attest to the security and confidence of their software that they're delivering to market.
Excellent. Well, we're very interested in following the conversation with you guys, especially in the context of this report. But let's go to Ken. Ken, what do you do at
Great,
BlackBerry?
thanks, Ishmael. Very nice to meet everybody. My name is Ken Murphy. I'm the VP and GM of the Critical Events Management or Messaging business at BlackBerry. So as the three of you mentioned, BlackBerry is a software company, but we have our roots in communication, and we have our roots in secure messaging. And today, the Critical Events Messaging or Management business provides organizations, governments, companies, schools, hospitals, whatever it might be, the ability to allow them to quickly communicate across multiple modalities. So text message, or actually, a siren, or a klaxon, or something along those lines, in a time of crisis. So we help the organizations plot their way through the anatomy of a crisis, and then how do they message out to their constituents. And the world, unfortunately, is kind of a more dangerous and scary place these days. So it's very more and more important for organizations to be able to reach out to their employees when there's a crisis, and that crisis can be a fire. But as we're talking about today, with the supply chain, why I'm here, it could also be an intrusion into their network, possibly through a supply chain risk. So that's why I'm here today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Back to you, Ishmael.
That's very interesting, Ken. And I have to say, maybe like myself, the majority of the people here in this listening to this LinkedIn Live, they're not familiar with that type of incident. So I would love to learn more about that throughout the discussion today. Well, thank you. And so as you can see, yes, we do security, but we embed security into every single device, including phones, right? I always tell people, it's like we have the BlackBerry security suite in our phones, and in fact, we have even high-level encryption or high-end encryption that allows to secure communications at the highest level. Right? We have a lot of customers around the world that demands this type of security, and that's one of our big pillars. Right? We have like 4 pillars. SecuSmart is that business based out of Germany with a high-end encryption and for data and voice to protect these communications. Silence, endpoint security, many people might be familiar with, and the unified endpoint management and critical event management with ad hoc, which is what you were talking about, Ken. So that's very interesting to me because we're at the convergence of IoT and the traditional cybersecurity, right? Obviously, all the automotive part that you, Christine, and team, you guys support as well with QNX, which is fascinating, right? And we're going to see more of that as we go along. The IoT market is just going to grow. So maybe something, again, to have in mind as we discuss the results of this report. So let's get into that. Why did we conduct this research, Christine? What was the rationale behind it, and how did we do that? What kind of people we interviewed?
Yeah, well, and that's a great question. One of the things that we've always been really interested in, historically, BlackBerry's always done it's always been kind of our first love has really been the supply chain. I mean, back from when we did make handsets, we started kind of being one of the original sort of groups that looked at the supply chain and made sure, because we were held accountable to that very early on as a company, because of the markets we were selling into, the customer bases that we marketed to, they've always done an excellent job of holding us accountable for making sure that, not only do the widgets that we build do the security things that we say that they do, but, what about those widgets themselves and how are those secured? And, by taking the widget, am I degrading my own security posture? Or how are you managing that? And so, we as a company have kind of grown up this way. We've always taken that security posture very seriously. And when executive order, first, I think SolarWinds happened. I think, everybody remembers SolarWinds and how, that kind of played through. That really ricocheted off of a lot of software producers. It really made people question, am I looking at my security of the things that I'm producing rather than just the IT side of, I'm procuring these things and bringing them in, but what is my own supply chain look like when I look at what I'm producing and what I'm consuming? Am I looking at that holistically? And we did a lot of talking about that. And when Executive Order 14028 came out and, the US government started talking about it, it was kind of like, I think for a lot of people in our industry that do and work on the product side of security and the software side, it was sort of like, we all kind of went, okay, yeah, finally it's here. It isn't just a thing, it really does need to be managed. And we really started talking about that and wondering what other companies were really thinking. Is everybody struggling with this? Is this a topic of interest? Again, we're certainly leaders in this space, so we wanted to also be helpful. I think and just start the broader conversation around how difficult is this to do, or is this just something that we think is really interesting to manage, but are others just really good at this and maybe we're just not asking the question. The other thing I'll add is this has always kind of been a topic that really just has been kind of, I won't say it's under wraps, but it just doesn't, we don't talk about it a lot as an industry. And there's, many reasons which I won't go into, but it's always just kind of been this hush thing of, how hard is it to manage open source security in your software? Well, it is, how much open source is there in software? There's a lot, it doesn't matter, what company it is, and then how hard is it to detect it? It's hard. So, you got a lot of companies that, don't really even know what's in their software. And I think that's really hard to start with. So, I mean, the survey itself, we looked at responses from 1,500 IT decision makers. And, the responses were, I think I was talking to Tim about this earlier. We somewhat had in mind, I think, what we were going to get back as far as survey responses, but I was actually blown away. I couldn't believe some of the numbers that came out in that response. Some of the percentages, I thought they'd be high. Some of them were a lot higher and a lot lower than I thought they would be. So I don't know, Tim, what are your thoughts, I guess, on some of the findings themselves? I'll let you speak to it since it's, we both looked at it, but this is your area too. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and as Christine mentioned, the findings were actually quite surprising. So, it's something like 81% of respondents here indicated that they've actually been notified and experienced a breach of their software supply chain in the last year. So we knew that would likely be high, but 81% is obviously the vast majority of people consuming software. And I think more interestingly is 77% of respondents indicated that through an exercise, they've discovered a element of their software supply chain or their supply chain in general, which they previously were unaware of. That means 77% of people were unaware of some software component or some supplier in their supply chain that could have had a cyber breach, and they just didn't know about it. So this is really what Executive Order 14028 is having software companies, both as a software producer and companies as software consumers, really drive into that visibility. So elements of software bill of materials are becoming more and more mainstream within our industry today. And that really aims at, when I purchase a piece of software, or as a software producer, when I'm providing that piece of software, provide the visibility to your customer, and as a customer, ensure you obtain that visibility of what libraries are in your software. So when the next big breach hits the headlines, knock on wood, we're approaching an anniversary date of Log4j. Let's hope we not get into that over the holiday season again. But do you know what's in the software that you've purchased and that you might be affected by this next big headline breach? With 81% of respondents saying that they've experienced that breach, chances are you may have a library within software you've consumed that could be affected. Now, of those 77% of respondents that said, the 81%, I should say, that said they've experienced a breach, 59% said that they were impacted mostly operationally. So they had an operational impact to their business due to this breach, which obviously equates to dollars lost. And then 57% of the respondents said that they suffered actual data loss as a result of that breach, which is obviously going to trigger in many countries regulatory reporting requirements and things like that, which are going to affect brand. Now, I don't want to pepper everyone with a ton of statistics because I also want to make sure you go out there and read that report. Just to round it out a bit more, when a breach does happen, and this ties into Ken's area of the business here around critical event management and communication, 62% of respondents said that speed of communication is probably the top priority for them during an event, during a breach. So with 62% saying that, 77% use multiple methods of communication during a cyber breach. And 66% of those respondents said that they would love and entertain a single consolidated way to collaborate and communicate during a breach event, both with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, so members of your supply chain. And I think that's really important because, once you're breached, we saw it in a number of headline breaches actually just in the past couple of months where Slack was taken over by the attacker. Do you have a reliable means of communication to communicate with your stakeholders during that actual breach event? If your mail server is not available, if your collaboration platform is not available, what's your plan there? So that really ties into the elements of critical event management. Now, just to round out the statistics, and then I'll leave the rest in the report for everybody, but 68% said they find it really difficult to obtain visibility of software that's potentially impacted by a vulnerability. And I think this speaks to one aspect of the software bill of materials that I was referring to. So getting that software bill of materials, which has standard formats that are machine readable, is one part of the equation. I think where our industry has a long way to go still is tooling to consume and pull the relevant bits out of that software bill of materials so that when the next big breach headline hits, you can easily identify what aspects of your infrastructure within your organization are actually impacted. So tooling around that visibility to leverage the software bill of materials that organizations will be receiving is going to be essential. And there's a lot of government incentive programs right now actually to build out tooling to help with that.
That's very interesting, Tim, and thanks for sharing that. First of all, before we go into the drill down and discuss some of those highlights that you gave us, let's remember where people can actually find the report. So we have a URL here, a shortened URL we can use that will take you to the report of the that we're discussing here on software supply chains. Now let's digest all of these numbers. The first thing, my first reaction when I look at that, like 81%, right? 77% not knowing about this. I'm feeling like, whoa. It's interesting how organizations we all have like vulnerability management, right? And what do? We scan the network, we scan systems, we commission pen test reports. Somebody's gonna try to break through your perimeter, but that's not how attacks are happening these days, right? I mean, not the majority of the attacks, or not most of the attacks as it seems. Of course, like we don't have to neglect that, and attackers will always go after the low-hanging fruit, because as I usually say, attackers are lazy. They're always going to do whatever is easier. But I don't feel that people is including this as part of their threat models. I don't see people doing emulations of this type of behavior to understand like what would be possible for an attacker that is doing this. And we see this on a regular basis. We have been reporting lately through our CTIs, through our cyber threat intelligence team, some of these campaigns where attackers have been packing or bundling malware with legitimate applications like KeyPass and others. It's not that they breached KeyPass in this particular case, but they've been setting up fake websites that they resemble this, like in this case without an S, right? KeyPass with one single S.org, and then saying, hey, you want to download this? You're going to download it, but this time it comes with info stealers and other malware droppers. Now, this is different because we're talking about somebody infiltrating an organization and reaching out to all of their constituency and customers through that software. But still, it's similar. It shows a trend that is probably going to continue to grow. I mean, you mentioned Log4j. I mean, Christine, I'm pretty sure you were very busy during that time. What's your opinion on these numbers?
Well, yes, we were very busy at that time. And I think what these numbers are really going to point out to is that the telemetry is the telemetry. I mean, the attack surface is the attack surface for any company. We think a lot about it very in a very single-lensed approach right now. And I think what this report tells us is that companies are really taking a step back and really, pulling back that lens and looking at everything from a complete attack surface point, and that I have to have all of the telemetry. Right, because attackers are smart. They're going to take that weakest point. And if a company can't lens out and sort of understand the entire surface of everything it's producing and consuming together, then you're missing a huge part of that. And I think having the executive order come out, Executive Order 14028, that is, and really come out and start pointing to that. I think it also pointed out a very big gap in kind of the industry we have in talking about that sort of lensed out telemetry. We have critical event response, but do we have critical event response? We're tracking, we're doing, like you said, we're scanning things. Are we looking at everything? Because that front door is going to get left open. It's going to get walked through one way or the other. So I don't know, Ken, what you think on critical event management, but I guess the other thing that I think about that is crisis response is, it's this wide in some companies instead of this wide, which is what it should be. I think of a lot of, Ken, some of the things that we've talked to throughout the time we've been working together, the amazing stories that I hear of just heroics in event management that really aren't being talked about. And when I read this report, I come back to the fact that, wow, crisis event management and communications was just so important throughout this report. So if you have a great telemetry system, the other thing that I think about is communications and sort of your world and how customers deal with any critical event, right? Not just the ones that we think about might happen, but all of them. And then how do we demonstrate ability there? So I don't know Ken, what your thoughts are.
You're spot on. You're spot on. And Ishmael earlier was talking about, do you have a plan for when you have an intrusion? Do you have a plan for reviewing your software supply chain? We've gone around and BlackBerry is unique in that we're the only large cybersecurity company that also has a large critical events management business. We're also the only large critical events management business that also has a large cybersecurity company. So when you can put those two things together, it's actually really, really quite interesting. So a number of our product team members have gone around. They talk to CISOs all the time, and one of the questions they say is, "Okay, well, let's run this simulation, right?" So you've put in all the cyber protections you possibly can. You've done everything you possibly can, but you've been breached. It's happened. Okay, so what are you going to do? How are you going to communicate? First, how are you going to get your fire team together immediately? And oftentimes the CISOs will be like, well, we'll just send an email, or we'll call them, or we'll get on Slack. And Tim mentioned, or Ishmael, you mentioned earlier, the recent one where Slack was down, right? So you say, no, you can't. Your internal network has been compromised. And they're, oh, okay, all right. How are you going to get your fire team together? And many times when we talk to these CISOs, they're like, I hadn't thought of that, right? Didn't really think through that concept. Then we say, okay, well, maybe somehow you're sitting next to your fire team, so you get your fire team together. But you have 10,000 employees, and they're working more from home. They're not in offices. You're not walking out to the office and yelling, "Hey, stop! Don't touch your machines." How are you communicating to them? They have a blue screen of death. So your employees, Billy or Bobby or Sally are out there in the field, and generally speaking, what are they doing? They can't work. They're going to call their friend, right? And they're going to say, what's going on? My email's not working. Is your email not working? No, my email's not working either. So what's the next thing they do? They go and they call 1-800 God help. They call the IT desk en masse. Guess what though? Your IT is trying to fix the problem, right? So you don't want this flood of calls coming in, and quite possibly you don't want them doing anything with their machines because they might exacerbate the problem. So what's your plan? You need to have a mechanism that's, first of all, not on your core network. It needs to be off your network with a supplier's network, whether it's ours or any other companies, right? You need to have an off network methodology that's a redundant methodology. You need to have a plan in place, because while you're in this situation, you can't be thinking up what method should I use to communicate. It has to be there. You can't say, well, I have to pull the data now from my workday to be able to send a message to the phone numbers of my employees. It has to already be there for you to be able to work, right? And then you need to say, well, what's the best method to send these messages? I can't send them by email to the work email. Maybe I need to do a robocall to my constituents, or some sort of method saying, hey, IT issue, please stand down. All of these things need to be worked through. And then on top of that, there's a real convergence of physical security and IT security, or cybersecurity, call it what you may, right? So more often than not now, you're going to see cyber attacks that actually will cause not only the data loss that we're talking about here, and the blue screens of death, or the ransomware attacks that we're used to, but they actually can impact the physical equipment, which are all connected, of the customer. So your supply, your factory goes down, your pipeline is stopped. It causes a fire or an explosion within your organization. So now not only are you having to do an emergency communication on, we've had an IT issue, but you also need to do an emergency saying, evacuate now, please. This is not a drill. You need to have that type of situation as well. So all of these things are converging on us real time.
That's super interesting, Ken. And as you were talking, you were bringing me back to some of the things that I've lived throughout my professional career, because I've done incident response myself for a long time. And I remember 2012, largest attack that we had seen until that point in the Middle East, right, against a very large organization. 30,000 machines destroyed, completely destroyed. The year after, we saw other attacks targeting very large organizations here in the United States that made the news. And we've seen some of these destructive attacks going on for quite some time. But I would say that what's different right now, it's that back in the day it was like very isolated cases against like very large organizations. But you mentioned Log4j team, and you're mentioning this type of crisis that it is that, right? I mean, incident response, even when we do cyber incident response, it's about crisis management. It's about like, okay, let's calm down, relax, let's try to find out what's going on, what's bleeding, let's contain, and then there's a lot of communications management, and making sure that the organization is doing the right thing and not doing something silly, right? That will actually hurt more. While the attacker is not aware of any of these activities, because otherwise you're going to end up playing like cat and mouse game, where the attacker is always going to be faster and one step ahead of you. But what's really interesting is that today we see smaller organizations being affected by the same things. And talking about Log4j, we reported on this case of this criminal group called Monty that took the playbook from Conti, whether it is Conti or not, but they took the playbook and they impacted an organization, middle-sized organization that had this vulnerability on a piece of software that was connected to the internet. It was Log4j. Through that, they were able to get into the organization, again, ransom the entire organization. So I think ransomware is something that's bringing this together, all these topics together: physical impact, business continuity planning, right? With the cyber world. But you're touching on a very interesting point, because I think that today organizations are operating in silos. Like you have the IT team, the security team, the physical security team, people doing the governance, risk, and compliance, the BCP. Like you touched on the convergence. Do you really see that happening? Is that something that you guys think it's going to help going forward?
I mean, from my personal view is I think that you have multiple security organizations right now. As you say, you even within operations centers, you'll have the physical security operations center for an organization, and then you will have the IT or the cyber or the technology security operations center. In the cybersecurity world, we talk about SOCs all the time, but it's a virtual. You're managing the virtual or the cyber security. I think you're going to see those two organizations start to more and more and more merge because of this combination of factors. The fact that the IT risks are leaking into the physical risks, and the physical risks are leaking into the technology risks.
Yeah, and I think as far as teams, like especially on a software producer side, is when you're producing a software as a service application, immediately your corporate IT, your DevOps team, your developers, like you all become part of this closely knit, tight ecosystem to get that software to market quickly. So we're really seeing the convergence of even corporate IT, corporate infrastructure, and product security teams.
Yeah, and I'll just add lastly on that when the challenge becomes when you have to bake security into every single thing that you do, keeping those teams siloed becomes difficult. I mean, you have to think for each other, and it becomes the distributed model all of a sudden gets really pulled. And then, as Tim alluded to, there's a lot of overlap in, just a cloud offering and a is it a cloud offering? Is it a SaaS offering? Is it an on-prem offering? And who wants what and where? And then you end up crossing over so many teams. I think the distributed models as they sit have to get really efficient if they stay distributed. That's, and with just forcing the baking into every single thing, the need for efficiency, because it's all costly. It's all dollars out and dollars in. So I think that just the need to reduce the liability is just huge. I mean, and Ken, to your point, even to think about something to do with crisis response, how do you plan for that when everybody's off and running in different pillars? It's very difficult. I think the distributed model will stay, but it's going to be forced. Leadership is going to be forced to make it efficient, and that's very difficult. Obviously it's possible. It's just difficult.
So do you guys see, as we wrap up this conversation, because I know we could talk about this for hours, right? It's a fascinating topic and a very important one. We talked about the communications, but we also talked in the report about the lack of visibility. How do you think, what would be your recommendation for organizations that want to increase that level of visibility? I know you guys do that internally for us at BlackBerry to keep us, safe. But things like, for example, product security testing. Do you see that happening more often? Is that something that companies will do by themselves or others will do for them? Some people might think, will the government do this for me, right? Monitor these projects and their dependencies.
Yeah. I think my last recommendation in the few seconds we have remaining here is just to fall back and start with telemetry. You're not going to manage anything unless you have telemetry of your entire attack surface, and that is all the things that you produce and all the things that you consume. If you're making a web app, you're a producer. And that is that's a real hard hitting fact for a lot of companies at this point, is to realize that they're releasing an app and now they have to figure out how to secure it. So make sure you have the telemetry. When you have the telemetry and you know what your entire surface looks like, every vendor that is in your supply chain, everything that you're producing, everything you're consuming, and you can squish those together and have an entire telemetry, then you can start worrying about things like pen testing that, threat modeling that, to Ken's point, and really one of the most important things is critical event management, and making sure that your company can function when any of that is attacked, because your criminals absolutely are looking at all of that. Whether you're looking at it or not, it's just, everybody else is. So I guess that's my final kind of thought, and where to start with all of this is just to look at that telemetry.
Very good. I think it's a call for planning, right? We need to. I'm a big proponent of threat modeling, as many of you know, and we cannot plan. If we don't know what's the attack surface, what we have, how we're going to communicate in this case of this type of events. Well, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to have you with us today, team Ken and Christine. And yes, go read the report. You can download it there. You don't have to register, and it's a very interesting report. You can use it to maybe raise some awareness within your organization that this is a risk to everybody, not just large organizations, and start using this information to plan ahead. That's the purpose also of this show, right? To communicate and share not just the threats, but also how to be better protected, not just in the cyber world, but in the world, right? The real world too. Well, thank you so much, and we will see you all in the next LinkedIn Live. Thank you.
Thanks, Ishmael.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Bye.